Great, Leslie. Thanks so very much. That is such a positive story. But I would like to switch over now and have Iman discuss principally what he does. And one of the big concerns is, of course, what are the challenges associated with building affordable housing? We keep talking about affordable housing. Read the Wall Street Journal yesterday, the prices are going up worldwide for housing, particularly in the Bay Area. And we all just scratch our heads and say, goodness gracious, the cost of housing is off the chart. So Iman, if you could weigh in on some of the positive things, but certainly the impact and actually more specifically, what you do as the president of Iman Development.
Thanks, Matt. Thank you, Jaime and Leslie, for your great presentations and for sort of setting the ground around our county and city homelessness issues. So we often talk about housing and homelessness, and you know, they're very much intertwined, but they're also very different. And I think it's important to sort of understand that it's not an either or, it's an and it's you know, oftentimes we talk about, you know, how to keep people housed. We talk about housing stability, we talk about permanent housing, we talk about creating self-sufficiency. So it's, I think when I talk about housing, it's important to understand that it's not sort of in a vacuum. We're not going to solve our homelessness problem by suddenly building 10,000 units of housing in Contra Costa County. It's really important to provide wraparound services and these partnership models that include both, you know, affordable, clean, safe housing, along with the services that residents need to be successful in that housing, whether it's veteran services for low-income veterans, whether it's mental health services for those with those types of issues. So, you know, there's also a lot of misinformation about homelessness and the root causes, and I think a big part of the future success as a business community is helping to spread awareness and encourage that other businesses step up, volunteer time, resources, support service providers like Trinity Center and others throughout our county, because at the end of the day, homelessness impacts everyone. And a successful recovery, in my opinion, should be judged by how it sort of helps the most vulnerable populations. So, you know, what are some of the challenges with housing? So Novin Development, my company, specializes in affordable housing development. I'm one of a number of locally based affordable housing developers. And for the most part, what that means is that we're using various local, state, and federal funding sources to build permanent affordable housing. And the biggest funding source for this type of housing is, of course, low-income housing tax credits, which were created as a way to align some corporate interests with social interests by providing a dollar-for-dollar tax write-off or credit, actually, to help create communities like St. Paul's Commons. Some of the challenges with housing production. I saw recently that there's something like 7.5 million unit deficit in the US for the lowest income earners. So we have a huge housing crisis, and it sort of goes from extremely low income to very low income all the way up the spectrum to sort of the moderate income individuals who are also struggling. Anybody who's spending more than 30% of their total annual income on housing costs, whether that's a mortgage or rent, is considered cost burdened. According to the HUD rules, if you're spending more than 50%, you're severely cost burdened. And something like 50% of those living in Contra Costa County are in some shape cost burdened. So this isn't just an issue of homelessness. I think that the struggle with housing affordability and stability is creeping up the income scale. And we also talk a lot about sort of missing middle housing and workforce housing. And so it's a large problem all the way up and down the spectrum. And part of that is just as a result of, if you look back at the annual production of housing, the California Department of Housing and Community Development does a great job of publishing sort of how well we've done in terms of unit delivery, unit production over the years. And there's been a large slowdown in the last, decade or so. And there's estimates of, we should be building something like 180,000 units annually in California to keep up with demand, but we're only building, less than half of that annually. And so you look at sort of the lack of annual production, and you also add to that sort of the shortfall that we're currently in, and it's just that sort of gives you a flavor of how big the lack of housing is. So why is it so hard? Projects like the Trinity Center, I always say it's an act of God when these come together, because there are so many layers of funding. There are so many complexities. This isn't, you have all of the same challenges as market rate development, whether it be entitlements, but you also have to work through the not in my backyard sentiment for affordable housing. You also have to layer 7 or 8 different sources of financing together from local, state, and federal funding sources, all of which are competitive, to be able to create the capital. It costs the same to build an affordable housing building, if not more, on a per unit basis. Some of the numbers out there that I think, Matt, you alluded to the costs. Affordable housing is costing something like $700,000 per unit to build. That's a combination of prevailing wage, the fact that affordable housing developers are often building to a higher quality standard because they plan to own and operate the building for 55 plus years, and they're not planning on just selling it. And so these things all drive costs. And so that's why it also takes a long time, because cities have to cobble together little buckets of money and home and CDBG, and with redevelopment gone away, there isn't a large local source of funding that like there used to be to subsidize affordable housing development. The state has sort of stepped up more recently in putting up more funding, but it's still very fragmented. You have to apply to 5 different programs to make a single affordable housing development work. And so I think that one of the big things that the state Housing and Community Development Department is doing is trying to streamline all of these different buckets of funding and align it better. So you basically apply with one universal application and get access to all of the different housing programs out there, whether it's the mental health funding, or whether it's veteran focused or homeless focused, or youth transitioning out of foster care. We have basically a program for every issue, but at the end of the day, it's building housing. And so I think there's a lot of ways we can streamline that. Site identification is hard. Affordable housing developers are competing with market rate developers to find sites for affordable housing. And they have the added challenge of finding sites that not only are good for the tenants, i.e. those sites that are close to transit, close to pharmacies and libraries and other neighborhoods serving amenities, grocery stores. Those happen to be the same sites that market rate developers are looking for, and they have deeper pockets and can close faster because they're not trying to use these obscure and difficult government funding programs to purchase the land. These are some of the challenges that affordable housing developers face in creating new affordable housing. Some of the things that we need to focus on as a community is preservation. And I think, the county spoke a little bit about purchasing motels during COVID. I see that as a growing way to create and preserve affordable housing. There's a lot of apartment buildings out there that have been owned by the same individual for 20 or 30 years, and they're retiring. And the apartment building is high vacancy because of COVID-related issues, and these apartment buildings serve as an opportunity for preservation as naturally occurring affordable housing. Office buildings, I've seen an increase in office building conversions to housing. Again, motels and hotels being converted to housing. That's a quicker way of delivering affordable housing than perhaps the tax credit, affordable housing, new construction route.
I'm going to get back to you on a bunch of that. What I want to do is jump over to the police department, but I want you to keep the thought in mind, because there's a lot of criticism within the region of Walnut Creek and some of the cities putting up these incredible apartments all downtown, kind of the European perspective of we're close in, but those aren't affordable for the average person. So people are saying, well, wait a minute, you're building all this, units are being built, but they're not being built that the average kid coming home from college can live in, much less somebody who's lost his job, Dow Chemical or something. So keep that thought in mind, because we'll get back to that.